Hiro's hand did not shake. That was the part nobody would have expected. That was the part that made it so much harder to watch. His hand was completely, terribly still as he dragged the pen across the signature line of those divorce papers, and the only thing that gave away what was happening inside him was the single tear that fell without permission and landed on the corner of the page, spreading slowly into the paper like it was trying to leave a mark. Like some part of Hiro was fighting to make sure that at least something about this moment would not be so easy to erase. Kenji was standing by the window. He was not looking at Hiro. He had not looked at Hiro properly in 4 days, and that alone should have told Hiro everything, because Kenji had always been a person who looked. That had been one of the first things Hiro ever noticed about him. The way Kenji paid attention, the way he watched the people he cared about like they were something worth studying, worth understanding, worth the time. But right now, on this evening that would break both their lives in ways neither of them fully understood yet, Kenji was staring at the window with his jaw tight and his arms crossed, and the look of a man who had already made up his mind and was simply waiting for the paperwork to confirm it. The apartment was quiet. It was almost always quiet when Hiro was in a room. Not the uncomfortable quiet that makes people shift in their seats and reach for their phones, but the kind of quiet that had a texture to it, a warmth, the kind that Kenji had once told Hiro felt like finally being able to breathe. He had said that 2 years ago, sitting on this same floor with his head in Hiro's lap after a terrible day at work, and Hiro had smiled down at him and run his fingers slowly through his hair and written on the small notepad he kept on the coffee table. "You can always breathe here. This is your safe place." Kenji had kept that note. He had folded it carefully and put it in the small wooden box on his side of the bed where he kept things that mattered. He had not thought about that note in 4 days. Hiro set the pen down. He pushed the papers gently across the table toward Kenji. Gently, the way Hiro did everything, the way that used to make Kenji feel like he was being handled with more care than he deserved. And then Hiro folded his hands in his lap, and he waited. His eyes were dry now. The one tear was all he had allowed himself, and even that had not been entirely on purpose. He sat straight. He breathed slowly, and he looked at the side of Kenji's face with an expression that was not anger, was not bitterness, was not even the desperation that would have been so understandable in that moment. It was something much more painful than any of those things. It was a look of complete and quiet understanding. The look of someone who had already, in the hours before Kenji came home with those papers, accepted something that their heart had not yet been given permission to accept. Kenji finally turned from the window. He looked at the papers first, then, briefly, at Hiro. He picked up the papers. He said nothing, and the silence that lived between them in that moment was not the warm, breathing silence that had always been their language. It was hollow. It was the sound of something ending. Kenji had come home 4 days ago with his face arranged into an expression Hiro had never seen on him before. Careful, closed. The expression of a person rehearsing something in their head and checking it against reality as they went. Hiro had noticed immediately, because Hiro noticed everything about Kenji. That was simply what happened when you spent years learning to read the world without sound. You became very good at reading people, at catching the small shifts that most others walked right past. He had looked up from the book he was reading when Kenji walked in, and something in his chest had tightened without explanation. The way it does when your body understands something 3 steps ahead of your mind. He had written, "Are you okay?" Kenji had said yes. He had kissed Hiro on the top of the head, in the distracted way of someone who was thinking about something else entirely. And he had gone to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water he barely touched. And Hiro had watched him from the couch with careful eyes and told himself it was probably just work stress. Kenji carried the weight of his father's firm like a stone on his back some days. It was probably that. It was almost certainly just that. But it was not that. The next 3 days had been a particular kind of torture that Hiro had no words for, which was something, because Hiro had developed an extraordinary relationship with written language precisely because it was his only relationship with language at all. But there are some things that cannot be organized into sentences. There is a feeling that lives in a home when something invisible has already been decided, when the air itself seems to know that an ending is coming even while the people inside are still going through the motions of ordinary life. Kenji had gone to work. Hiro had cooked. They had sat at the same table for dinner. They had slept on the same side of the same bed. And the entire time, the distance between them had been growing like a crack in ice, silent, spreading, and absolutely irreversible once it reached a certain point. Hiro had tried. That needs to be said clearly, because later, when people would talk about this, and people would talk, they always talk, some would wonder whether Hiro had fought for his marriage, whether the mute Omega had tried hard enough, communicated clearly enough, done enough to hold things together. So it needs to be said clearly. Hiro tried. On the second night, he had made Kenji's favorite meal and set the table with the small candle they only ever used for special occasions, and written a note that said, "Talk to me. Whatever it is, talk to me. I am right here." Kenji had looked at the note for a long time. Then he had looked at Hiro with something complicated moving behind his eyes, something that looked almost like guilt, and he had said, "I'm fine, Hiro. I'm just tired." On the third night, Hiro had sat next to him on the couch and taken his hand and simply held it, because sometimes that was the most honest thing two people could do together. Kenji had let him, for about 4 minutes, and then he had gently pulled his hand away and said he had emails to answer and gone to the study and closed the door. The closed door had hurt more than anything else, because in 4 years of living together, in all the hard days and complicated seasons that any real relationship carries inside it, Kenji had never once closed that door on Hiro. On the 4th day, he came home with the papers. He had not yelled. He had not accused Hiro of anything directly, which was almost worse, because at least an accusation would have been something Hiro could respond to, something he could write a reply to, could shake his head at, could look Kenji in the eye and answer. Instead, Kenji had set the papers on the table and said, in a voice that was trying very hard to sound steady, "I think we both know this isn't working anymore." And Hiro had stared at him. Because no, Hiro had not known that. Hiro had known the opposite of that. Hiro had believed, with the full weight of everything he was, that what they had was working, was real, was the truest and most important thing in his life. He had believed it that morning when he packed Kenji's lunch and tucked a small note inside that said, "Come home soon," with a tiny drawn star beside it, because Kenji had once mentioned he liked looking up at stars when he was stressed. He had believed it 3 days ago when he lit that candle. He had believed it in the library 8 years ago when a clumsy, loud, wonderful boy knocked over his bag and looked at his handwriting like it was something beautiful. He had believed it right up until the moment he looked at those papers and understood that Kenji had not. There was a reason Kenji had come home believing something terrible about Hiro without asking a single question. So there was a person responsible for planting that seed, for watering it with whispers and carefully worded suggestions, and the slow, patient work of someone who wanted something that Hiro had. But Hiro did not know that yet. All he knew was the papers. All he knew was the window and the silence and the careful, closed face of the man he had loved completely for 8 years. He wanted to write so many things. He wanted to write, "What did I do? Tell me what I did." He wanted to write, "Look at me. Please just look at me." He wanted to write, "I have something to tell you. Something I have been waiting for the right moment to tell you, and I was going to tell you tonight, and I had a card and everything." He wanted to write, "Please do not do this. Please. I am asking you with everything I have. Please do not do this." But the notepad was on the coffee table, and his legs did not feel like they belonged to him anymore. And somewhere between seeing those papers and picking up that pen, Hiro had understood something devastating. That Kenji had already made his choice. That the 4 days of closed doors and untouched water glasses and hands pulled gently away had not been Kenji struggling with a decision. They had been Kenji waiting to deliver one. And there is a specific kind of heartbreak that comes from realizing that while you were fighting quietly for something with every tool available to you, the other person had already let it go, had already, in every way that counted, already left. So Hiro did not write any of those things. He signed the paper with a still hand and one tear and the quiet dignity of someone who had never in their life been given the luxury of falling apart in front of others. He stood. He walked to the bedroom. He pulled the bag from the top of the closet. The old travel bag, the brown one. The one they had bought together at a second-hand market 3 years ago when they were talking about taking a trip someday. Some beautiful someday that had never quite arrived. He packed only what was necessary. He did not take the photos. He did not take the notes Kenji had written him on the rare occasions Kenji had borrowed his communication style. Those few handwritten things that Hiro had kept in a small envelope at the back of the drawer. He did not take the little wooden box from Kenji's side of the bed, even though he knew what was inside it. He took his notebooks. He took his medications. He took the small card he had made that morning, the one he had been planning to show Kenji at dinner, the one with the small 5-pointed stars drawn carefully across the top, and the words written inside that would have changed everything if Kenji had only waited one more day, had only asked one single question, had only looked at Hiro the way he used to and trusted what he saw. He put that card in his jacket pocket. He carried it out with him when he walked through the front door for the last time. Kenji was still standing by the window. He did not turn around when he heard the door. He stared out at the city lights, and he told himself that this was the right thing, that people made hard choices for good reasons, that the hollow feeling spreading through his chest was just the natural weight of a difficult decision, and not, absolutely not, the feeling of someone who had just made a catastrophic mistake. He was wrong, but he would not know exactly how wrong for a very long time. And by then, 5 small lives would have already learned to exist without him. Not the movies, not the songs, not the friends who hold your hand and say you will get through this with such confident warmth that you almost believe them. None of them tell you about the specific cruelty of that first morning, the way your body wakes up before your mind does, and for exactly 3 seconds everything is fine. Everything is normal. The world is the same world it was before. And then reality arrives. Not slowly, not gently. Not with any of the grace that pain is supposed to have in stories. It arrives all at once, like cold water, like a door slamming open in a house you thought was locked. And you are lying in a strange place with a bag on the floor that is not fully unpacked, and a silence around you that is completely different from the silence you are used to, because the silence you are used to had someone else breathing in it, and this one does not. Hiro woke up in his older cousin Ren's spare room on a mattress that was slightly too soft, and stared at a ceiling he did not recognize, and let that 3-second grace period pass over him like a wave, and then he pressed both hands flat against his stomach. Carefully, the way you touch something you are still learning to believe in, and he breathed. In, out, in, out. He was not alone. He had to remember that. Even here, even in this strange room with the unfamiliar ceiling and the bag that was not fully unpacked, he was not alone. There were 5 lives pressed close against the inside of him. 5 tiny, secret, unbelievably real lives, and they did not know yet that the world outside was already more complicated than it should have been. They only knew warmth. They only knew the steady rhythm of Hiro's heartbeat, which he was working very hard right now to keep steady, because even in the worst moment of his life, some part of Hiro was already mothering, already protecting, already putting something else first. That was who Hiro was. That had always been who Hiro was. Ren had not asked many questions the night before when Hiro appeared at his door with a brown travel bag and eyes that were dry and careful, and a look on his face that said everything without saying anything at all. Ren was 30, practical, loud in the way that people are loud when they have spent their whole lives compensating for a quiet cousin they loved and could not always protect. He had taken one look at Hiro, stepped aside and said, "Room is yours as long as you need it. I made soup." And that had been it. No interrogation. No dramatic declaration of anger at Kenji, though the way Ren's jaw tightened when Hiro wrote a brief explanation on his notepad suggested that the anger was very much present and simply being held back out of respect for what Hiro needed in that moment. Ren understood, better than most, just that Hiro did not need noise right now. He had a whole life full of other people's noise. What he needed was exactly what Ren gave him: soup, a room, and the quiet permission to fall apart privately. Hiro had not fallen apart. Not yet. He was not sure he knew how. He sat up slowly on the mattress and reached for the notepad on the floor beside the bag. Because there was always a notepad, always within arm's reach. It was as automatic as breathing. And he did not write anything on it. He just held it. He held it the way someone else might have held a phone to call a person who no longer picked up, or held a pillow to fill the space where someone used to sleep. He held it because it was his, because it was familiar, because in a morning that felt completely foreign, it was one of the few things that still made sense. The card was still in his jacket pocket. He had hung the jacket on the back of the door the night before, and he could see it from where he sat, and he made a decision without really deciding. He was not going to look at it today. Not today. The card had been meant for a different version of yesterday, a version where Kenji had come home and Hiro had made dinner, and at some point during the meal, Hiro had slid it across the table with his heart sitting somewhere in his throat, and Kenji had opened it. And everything would have changed. That version of yesterday no longer existed. And looking at the card today would only be a way of grieving the version of Kenji he had believed in. The one who would have opened that card and pulled Hiro into his arms and said something clumsy and wonderful and completely sincere. He was not ready to grieve that version yet. He had more urgent things to do. He had 5 more urgent things to do. The pregnancy had not been planned, but it had not been a surprise in the way that unwanted things are surprising. It had been a surprise in the way that gifts are surprising, startling at first, and then, once the initial shock settled, immediately and completely right. Hiro had found out on a Tuesday, 3 weeks before Kenji brought home those papers, and his first feeling had been something that lived between disbelief and joy. That breathless place where your brain is still catching up to what your heart already knows. His second feeling had been the practical, organized instinct that was so deeply woven into who he was. He had opened a new notebook and begun writing down questions to ask the doctor and things to prepare, and the careful, responsible list of everything that needed to happen next. And somewhere at the bottom of that list, underlined twice, was, "Tell Kenji, do it right. Make it something he will remember." He had spent 2 weeks planning how to tell him. 2 weeks of small, careful preparations. He had researched, in the quiet, thorough way Hiro researched everything, because his pregnancy was unusual, high risk in ways the doctors explained with gentle seriousness, and a lot of medical language that Hiro translated through the filter of his notebooks into plain, manageable terms. Multiples were always complicated, the doctor had said, and for an omega carrying 5, the complications multiplied accordingly. He would need consistent care. He would need rest. He would need support, real support, the kind that did not waver. He had believed Kenji was that support. He had been planning to ask him to be. Now Hiro sat in Ren's spare room and rewrote the entire plan from the beginning inside his head, quietly and without self-pity, because self-pity was something he genuinely could not afford right now. He thought about the doctor's appointments that would need to be made. He thought about the financial reality of raising 5 children as a single mute omega with a part-time income from the small calligraphy and graphic design work he did online. He thought about what Ren's apartment could and could not hold. He thought about all of it with the same methodical calm he brought to everything, organizing the fear into something that looked like a plan, because a plan was the only thing standing between him and the overwhelming enormity of what his life had just become. He was terrified. That is important to say plainly. Underneath every bit of the calm, underneath the steady hands and the dry eyes and the careful breathing, Hiro was more frightened than he had ever been in his life. But fear, for Hiro, had never been a reason to stop. He had been frightened his whole life, frightened in the way that a person is frightened when the world was not built for them, when every system and every social space assumes you will announce yourself with sound, and you simply cannot. He had learned to be frightened and functional at the same time. He had learned to carry difficult things while still moving forward. And so he did what Hiro always did with the things that threatened to break him. He picked them up, he organized them, and he kept going. Ren knocked softly on the door at 8:30 and opened it to find Hiro already dressed, notepad in hand, writing a list that had 7 items on it already. Ren leaned against the doorframe and looked at his cousin with an expression caught somewhere between fierce admiration and deep sadness. The look of someone watching a person be braver than they should ever have to be. Hiro looked up. He turned the notepad around. "I need to find a doctor, and I need to tell you something." Ren came and sat on the edge of the mattress. He waited. Hiro wrote for a while. He wrote carefully, taking more space than usual, because this was not a simple thing to put into words, even for someone who had made words his entire language. When he finished, he passed the notepad to Ren and watched his cousin's face as he read. He watched the confusion come first, then the widening of eyes, then the long silence that was Ren doing the math, the timing, the reality, the full weight of what those sentences on the notepad actually meant. And then Ren looked up at Hiro with an expression that had moved completely past words, and Hiro saw in his eyes the moment the anger toward Kenji, which had been carefully restrained since last night, cracked through and became something raw and less controllable. But Ren did not let it out. He breathed through it. He folded it back, away from Hiro, because Hiro did not need that right now. Instead, Ren reached over and put his hand on top of Hiro's, firmly, the way you hold on to someone when you want them to know you are not letting go. And he said, in a voice that was quieter than his voice usually was, "Okay. Okay. We figure this out together. All of us. All of us." Hiro looked down at his hands, both of them now, Ren's over his, and then at his own stomach, and something moved through him that was not quite peace and not quite strength, but was the beginning of both. The beginning of the decision to stay standing. The beginning of the understanding that the story of his life had not ended the night before on a signed piece of paper. It had simply turned a page that he had not been expecting. Meanwhile, across the city, in the apartment that still smelled like Hiro's cooking, even though no one had cooked in it since he left, Kenji was standing in the kitchen at 7 in the morning, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold and staring at the table. There was a small piece of paper on the table that he did not remember leaving there. He picked it up slowly. It was from Hiro's notepad. It must have slipped from somewhere, the bag maybe, or fallen when Hiro set the pen down. It was not a message meant for Kenji. It was not dramatic or deliberately left behind. It was simply a piece of paper with Hiro's handwriting on it, and it said only 4 words. In the careful, beautiful script that Kenji had once told an 18-year-old boy in a library was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Come home soon. And beside it, a small drawn star. Kenji stared at it. The coffee cup in his hand tilted slightly without him noticing, and a drop fell to the floor, and he did not move. He stood completely still in the too quiet kitchen with that piece of paper in his hand, and something moved through his chest, like a crack moving through ice. The same metaphor, the same slow spread, the same terrifying sense of something that cannot be taken back once it reaches the edge. He put the paper down. He straightened. He told himself for the 4th time that morning that he had made the right decision. But the small drawn star looked up at him from the table like a question he did not yet know how to answer. Buildings do not rise or fall in 3 months. Streets do not change their names. The coffee shop on the corner keeps its hours and its menu, and the particular smell that drifts out every morning like a small, reliable promise. The world, in most of its visible ways, stays the same. And that is perhaps the strangest part of surviving something that has broken you. That the world does not mark it. That you can walk through streets that watched your life fall apart and find them completely unchanged, indifferent in the way that only large and ancient things can be indifferent, carrying on with the business of existing while you are somewhere in the middle of figuring out how to do the same. Hiro had learned this in 3 months. He had learned it in the way that the small grocery store 2 streets from Ren's apartment still arranged its fruit the same way every morning, and the elderly man at the counter still nodded at him with the same mild friendliness. And the sun still came through the east-facing window of Ren's spare room at the same angle every morning and landed on the same corner of the mattress that was now fully unpacked, the bag folded and stored on the top shelf of the closet, because Hiro had decided quietly and without ceremony that he was not going anywhere. That this room, small as it was going to be the place where he prepared, where he built, where he turned the impossible into the merely very difficult, one careful day at a time. He was showing now. There was no hiding it, not that he had tried. The first time Ren had seen the visible change, how he had stopped in the hallway with a grocery bag in each hand and simply looked at Hiro for a moment with an expression so full of complicated feeling, love and fury and protectiveness and grief all occupying the same face at the same time, that Hiro had tilted his head slightly in the way that meant say what you are thinking. And Ren had said, "You look incredible. And I want to go find Kenji Mori and shake him until his teeth rattle." Hiro had laughed, his silent laugh, the one that took over his whole face and made his eyes disappear into crescents. And he had written on his notepad, "Please don't. I need you here." And Ren had set down the groceries and said fine in the tone of someone making a promise he was going to find very challenging to keep. The doctor's appointments had become the rhythm of Hiro's weeks now. Every Tuesday, Ren drove him to the clinic on the other side of the city. The good one, the one with the specialist who understood high-risk omega pregnancies and spoke slowly enough that Hiro could write questions between explanations without feeling rushed. The doctor's name was Yamamoto, and she was a small, serious woman with reading glasses. She was always pushing up her nose and a manner that was brisk on the surface and deeply kind underneath. The kind of person who had seen enough difficult situations to have stopped wasting gentleness on unnecessary things and instead delivered it precisely, exactly where it was needed. She spoke to Hiro the way Hiro appreciated most, directly, without the careful, padded language that people sometimes used around him, as if his silence meant he also needed his information softened. She said what was true and waited while he processed it, and answered his written questions without making him feel like a burden for asking them. The 5, she had taken to calling them "your 5, said with a kind of fond exasperation, like they were already a handful before they had properly arrived, "were doing well. Remarkably well," she said each time, and each time Hiro could see that she meant it, that it was not the reassuring kind of well that doctors say to manage anxiety, but the genuine, slightly surprised kind that means the numbers are actually good. They were growing. They were strong. They were, against a considerable amount of medical probability, exactly where they needed to be. Hiro wrote in his notebook after every appointment, recording every detail in the careful, thorough way he recorded everything, and sometimes at night he would read back through those notes and feel something that took him a while to name correctly. It was not happiness exactly. Happiness felt too light for what was also present. It was closer to purpose. The feeling of having something so important to do that the pain of other things had to find a smaller space to exist in. The pain was still there. It always was. But it was learning to share the room. He had not contacted Kenji. This was a decision he had made consciously on the second day in Ren's apartment, sitting at the small kitchen table with his notepad open and a cup of tea going cold beside him while he thought it through with the same methodical honesty he brought to every hard thing. Then he had written 2 columns, the way he sometimes organized his thinking when the emotion of something was too large to see through without structure. On one side he wrote, "Reasons to tell him." On the other, "Reasons to wait." He had stared at both columns for a long time. And then he had written at the bottom of the page, in slightly larger letters, a question that was more honest than either column. Is he ready to hear it? And am I ready to be looked at like a problem to be solved? The answer to both at that point was no. So he had waited. Not out of cruelty. Hiro was not built for cruelty. It was simply not a material present in his construction. But out of self-preservation and out of something that was, if he was honest with himself, also a kind of grief. He was grieving the version of Kenji he had believed in, and until he was done grieving it, he could not approach the real version without the ghost of the other one getting in the way. Across the city, the real version of Kenji was unraveling in slow motion. It had started almost immediately. That specific, creeping discomfort that follows a decision your instincts knew was wrong, even while your mind was busy justifying it. The apartment felt wrong. Not in any dramatic way. Not in the way of ghost stories or obvious absence, but in the small, persistent way of a room where the furniture has been moved slightly. Everything looks almost right, but something is consistently, uncomfortably off, and you cannot stop noticing it no matter how hard you try. The kitchen felt wrong because Kenji kept opening the refrigerator and finding things exactly where he had put them, which sounds like a small thing, but was not. Because for 4 years, the refrigerator had always contained things arranged by someone else. Someone who remembered, without being reminded, that Kenji liked his water on the left and could not find anything if it was put on the highest shelf. The living room felt wrong because the small plants on the windowsill were beginning to lose color, and Kenji had only just realized, on the 9th day alone, that he had never once in 4 years watered them. The bedroom felt wrong in a way he refused to examine too carefully, because examining it led directly to the wooden box on his side of the bed, and he had not opened that box, had not moved it, had stepped around the awareness of its existence every morning and night the way you step around a bruise. He was telling himself it was adjustment. That was the word he was using. Adjustment. It was a responsible, adult, forward-looking word that implied he was moving through something rather than being buried in it. He went to work. He answered emails. He sat in meetings and nodded at the right moments and produced the work that was expected of him with the mechanical competence of someone who has learned to keep functioning while the more important parts of them are somewhere else entirely. Sana was still at the firm. She was friendly in the way that she had always been. Bright, easy, filling up rooms with the kind of energy that Kenji had once found refreshing, and now, for reasons he was only beginning to examine, found slightly exhausting. She had said she was sorry to hear about the divorce, in the careful tone of someone who is not entirely sorry. And Kenji had nodded and said thank you, and moved on, because there was nothing else to do. His mother had called to say she thought he had been very brave, and that time healed everything, and had he thought about going to dinner with Sana sometime, just casually, just to get out of the apartment. Kenji had held the phone slightly away from his ear and stared at the wall and said he would think about it. He did not think about it. What he thought about in the unguarded moments that ambushed him in the shower or on the train, or at 2 a.m. when sleep would not come, was Hiro. Not always the big things. Not always the 8 years and the marriage and the weight of what had ended. Sometimes it was small, embarrassingly small. He thought about the way Hiro made tea, which was different from how Kenji made it and was, he could now admit to himself, significantly better. He thought about the sound of Hiro moving around in the morning, quiet footsteps, the soft percussion of cabinet doors and drawers being opened and closed, which had been so constant a feature of his mornings for years that its absence was louder than any actual sound. He thought about the notes. He thought about them more than he would admit to anyone. The small handwritten notes that had been left in pockets and books and tucked under coffee cups for 4 years, and how he had not found one in over 3 months, and how he had not understood until they stopped how much he had relied on them. The piece of paper with "Come home soon" and the small drawn star was still on the kitchen table. He had not moved it. He was not entirely sure why. The lie itself, the specific, targeted, undestructive lie that had started all of this, came to light on a Wednesday afternoon in the 4th month, in the unremarkable setting of the office break room, in the way that truth often arrives. Not dramatically, not at a moment you have prepared for, but sideways, quietly, in the middle of an ordinary moment when your guard is completely down. Kenji was making coffee. 2 coworkers were talking near the door, not noticing him, or perhaps not caring that he was there. The way people sometimes do in offices when a conversation has too much momentum to stop. And one of them, A man named Taka, who had been at the firm longer than anyone and knew more about everyone's business than was probably healthy, said a name that stopped Kenji's hand on the coffee machine. The name of the coworker who had started the rumor. The coworker who had told the story about Hiro in a restaurant, with raised eyebrows and a lowered voice. Kenji stood very still and listened. He heard Taka say that the whole story had been invented. Not exaggerated, invented. That the coworker who told it had been trying to impress someone at the time, had built the story out of nothing, had seen Hiro exactly once from across a street, and constructed an entire elaborate fiction around a 3-second glimpse of a stranger. That the coworker had admitted this privately, apparently, to someone they trusted, who had then told someone else in the way that confessions always eventually travel. That it had gone no further because nobody thought it mattered anymore. After all, Taka's voice was flat in the way of someone reporting a fact without commentary. The divorce was already done. The coffee machine finished its cycle. Kenji did not pour the coffee. He stood with his hand still on the machine and felt the entire 4 months rearrange themselves in his chest. Every justification, every closed door, every night he had stared at the ceiling and told himself he had made the right call. Every morning he had stepped around the awareness of the wooden box, all of it shifting at once, like the ground moving, like the floor of everything he had built this decision on simply dropping away. The rumor had been a lie. There had been no truth to chase. There had been no reason. He had taken 4 years of marriage and 8 years of love and the most honest, patient, quietly extraordinary person he had ever known. A person who could not raise their voice to defend themselves, who could not call across a room to stop him. Who had sat at that table with a still hand and 1 tear and signed his name. And he had thrown all of it away based on a story that a coworker had made up to seem interesting at a dinner. He left the break room without the coffee. He went to his desk and he sat down and he stared at his computer screen for a long time without seeing anything on it. And then, slowly, he opened his phone. He went to Hiro's contact. Still there, had never once considered deleting it, and he stared at it. No texts between them in 4 months. The last message in the thread was from Hiro, sent the morning of the day Kenji came home with the papers, and it said, "I picked up your dry cleaning. It's on the chair." A completely ordinary message. A completely ordinary morning. The last ordinary morning. Kenji pressed call. It rang 4 times, and then it went to the automated message, because Hiro did not have a personal voicemail recording. Had never seen the point, for obvious reasons. Kenji hung up. He put the phone face down on the desk. He pressed both hands flat against the surface of the desk and breathed in the careful, deliberate way of someone trying very hard to hold themselves together in a public place. He had to find Hiro. What he did not know yet, what would arrive later in pieces, the way the full cost of a thing always arrives, was how much had happened in the 4 months he had spent in that apartment, staring at a small drawn star and telling himself he had done the right thing. He did not know about Ren's spare room and the mattress and the 2 columns in the notebook. He did not know about Dr. Yamamoto and the Tuesday appointments, and the word remarkable said with genuine surprise each time. He did not know about the 5, his 5, though he had not yet been given the right to call them that. Growing steadily and stubbornly and with a determination that seemed, to anyone paying attention, to have been inherited directly from their mother. He did not know about the card still in the jacket pocket on the back of the door. He knew only that he had been wrong, that the ground had dropped away. That somewhere in this city was a person who had loved him without condition, who had signed a paper with a still hand and 1 tear rather than fight a fight they could see had already been decided, who had walked out of their shared life carrying something Kenji did not know existed, and who had, for 4 months, been carrying it alone. He stood up from his desk. He did not know where Hiro was. He did not know what he was walking toward. He did not know what version of Hiro he would find, or what expression would be on that face when he arrived, or whether the warm brown eyes that had always seen him more clearly than he saw himself would look at him with the same understanding they always had, or with something new, something harder, something that he had put there with his own 2 hands. But he stood up. He picked up his jacket, and for the first time in 4 months, he moved toward something instead of away from it. The city outside was unchanged. Same streets, same coffee shop, same sky, everything was exactly the same, and nothing was the same at all. He is not a bad man, necessarily. He is not someone who woke up one morning and decided to be careless with something precious. He is simply a man who got comfortable, who let the noise of other voices drown out the quiet truth that was living right beside him, who confused the absence of drama with the absence of depth, and who made the catastrophic mistake that so many people make, of believing that something steady will always be there, simply because it always has been. He is the man who holds gold in his hands every single day until the day he opens his hands and finds them empty, and only in that emptiness finally understands what gold actually weighs. Kenji Mori was that man, and the journey he made across that city on a Wednesday afternoon, with his jacket half-buttoned and his heart making a noise in his chest that he had not heard it make before, was the journey of a man who had finally, devastatingly, understood what he was holding. Right at the moment, he realized he was no longer holding it. He did not have Ren's address. That was the first obstacle, and it arrived quickly, before he had even made it out of the building's front door. He stood on the pavement with his phone in his hand, and understood that in 4 months he had made no attempt to know where Hiro had gone, had asked no one, had perhaps on some level been avoiding the knowledge, because knowing would make it real in a way he was not ready for. He tried the phone again. 4 rings. Automated message. He tried twice more before he accepted that Hiro was not going to pick up, and he could not blame him for that, could not manufacture a single breath of indignation about it. Chakti, because Hiro did not owe him an answered call. Hiro did not owe him anything at all. He called his mother first, because she was the most likely person to have kept track, in the invasive, detail-oriented way she kept track of everything related to Kenji's life. The call lasted 45 seconds. Yukiko Mori said she did not know where Hiro was staying, and that she thought Kenji was doing so well, and that maybe this was a sign he should take some time for himself before reaching out. Kenji hung up before she finished the sentence. It was the first time in his life he had done that, and the feeling it left behind was not guilt, but something closer to clarity, sharp and sudden, like a window being opened in a room that had been closed too long. He called his oldest friend next. Day, who had known both him and Hiro since university, Chiki, who had stood at their wedding with wet eyes and a crooked tie, and who had, notably, not called Kenji once in the 4 months since the divorce. Day picked up on the second ring. There was a silence on the line when Kenji said Hiro's name, a particular weighted silence that contained an entire opinion. And then Day said, in the careful tone of someone choosing each word deliberately, "I know where he is, but before I tell you, I need you to understand something. He is not the same person you left, not because something is wrong with him, because he had to become stronger than you ever knew he was, and that kind of strength changes a person. You need to be ready for that." Kenji had gripped the phone and said, "Tell me." and Day had. And then Day had said one more thing, in a voice that was quiet and serious and full of something that Kenji would only later identify as warning. Whatever you think you are going to say when you get there, it is not going to be enough. I want you to know that going in. It is not going to be enough. But go anyway. He went anyway. Ren's apartment building was 40 minutes across the city by train, and Kenji stood the entire way because sitting felt wrong, felt too passive, felt like the wrong posture for what he was moving toward. He stood with one hand on the overhead bar and the city sliding past the windows, and he thought about what Day had said. Not the same person you left. He turned that over and over. He had been imagining Hiro for 4 months in the way that guilt imagines the people it has wronged. Preserved, static, existing in the moment of leaving. Chirdi's always with that particular expression of quiet devastation that had carved itself into Kenji's memory on the night of the papers and had not left since. He had not properly allowed for the possibility that Hiro had continued. That time had moved for Hiro the same way it moved for everyone, and that Hiro had moved with it in the direction that Hiro always moved. Forward, careful, steady, picking up the impossible and carrying it because that was simply what Hiro did. He had not allowed for 5 months of a life he knew nothing about. The building was ordinary. 4 floors, a buzzer panel by the front door, a small tree in a pot beside the entrance that looked like it was being kept alive through sheer stubbornness. Kenji stood in front of it for longer than made sense. He pressed the buzzer for Ren's apartment and heard the sharp sound of it from above and waited. The intercom crackled. Ren's voice came through, and even through the bad audio quality, Kenji could hear the precise moment Ren recognized his voice. The way the temperature of the silence on the line changed immediately, dropped several degrees, became something compressed and controlled. Ren said, "Wait there." He did not buzz him in. 3 minutes passed. Kenji stood in front of the building with his hands in his jacket pockets and the small tree in the pot beside him and the full weight of everything he had done pressing down on his shoulders like something physical. He thought about leaving. The thought lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then the front door opened. Ren stood in the doorway with his arms crossed and an expression that Kenji had never seen directed at him before. Not from Ren, who had always been easy and warm when the 4 of them had spent time together, who had laughed at Kenji's jokes and called him by a shortened nickname, and once spent an entire evening helping him pick out an anniversary gift for Hiro with the dedicated enthusiasm of a person who was genuinely invested in the happiness of both of them. That Ren was not in this doorway. This Ren was someone who had spent 5 months watching a person he loved carry something that should have been shared, and who had opinions about that which he was holding back only because he had been asked to. Ren looked at Kenji for a long moment. Then he said, "He knows you're here." He could see the buzzer from where he was sitting. A pause. He said, "I could let you up." That was his choice, not mine. I want to be very clear about that. Another pause. Longer. And I want to be clear about something else. Whatever you came here to say, you think carefully before you say it. Because there are more people in that room than just him now, and every single one of them deserves better than careless. Kenji did not fully understand those words yet, but he nodded, and Ren stepped aside. The stairs were narrow. The 4th floor felt like it took a long time to reach. Kenji stood in front of the door at the end of the hall and raised his hand to knock, and then stood there with his hand raised and not knocking for a moment that stretched, because there was something on the other side of this door that was going to change everything again. and some animal part of him knew it and was trying, one last time, to delay what was coming. But he had spent 4 months delaying. He had spent 4 months on the wrong side of doors. He knocked. The door opened, and Kenji saw Hiro and the world, which had been behaving normally and indifferently and entirely without drama all the way across the city, stopped making any sound at all. There was no single word adequate to what Hiro was. He was present in a way that was different from before, fuller somehow, taking up space with a quiet authority that Kenji had not associated with him previously, and now could not imagine him without. The warm brown eyes were the same. The still, careful hands were the same. The way he looked at Kenji, measuring, patient, giving nothing away until he chose to, that was the same, and also somehow deeper. Like something that had always been present, had been refined by the months between them into something more concentrated, more certain of itself. He was wearing a soft gray shirt, and he was unmistakably, visibly carrying new life, and the sight of it hit Kenji somewhere so deep and so fundamental that he actually took a small step backward without meaning to, like his body had absorbed information that his mind was still several seconds away from processing. He stared. He stared for a moment that lasted a very long time, and then the full reality of what he was seeing arrived in him all at once, and it was not clean or simple or anything like the realizations people have in movies that come with music and soft light and perfect words. It was devastating. It was the specific devastation of a person who has just understood the true scale of what they threw away. Not in the abstract, not in the emotional sense, but in the concrete, visible, undeniable sense of standing in a doorway looking at proof. Not one life he had walked away from, not 2. He had walked away from 6. He had taken a lie from a coworker who wanted to seem interesting at a dinner, and he had traded 6 lives for it without asking a single question. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Hiro watched him. He did not rush. He did not reach for the notepad on the small table by the door. Not yet. He simply let Kenji stand in the doorway with the full weight of the truth pressing down on him. Because Hiro was not cruel, but he was no longer willing to make difficult things easier for the person who had made them difficult in the first place. He had earned that. 5 months of Tuesday appointments and 2-column notebooks and Ren's spare room and the particular loneliness of building something enormous entirely alone. He had earned the right to let the truth sit on Kenji's shoulders for a moment without rushing to lift it. Kenji found his voice eventually. It came out wrong, too rough, too fractured, completely stripped of the careful steadiness he had been rehearsing on the train. He said, "Hiro, I know." He stopped, started again. "I know what I did. I know what the rumor was. I found out. I know it wasn't real. I know I didn't ask you, and I should have asked you, and there is no version of this where what I did was right." He stopped again because his voice was threatening to do something that he was going to try very hard to prevent it from doing in this hallway. "I know I don't have the right to be here. I know Ren doesn't want me here. And you had every reason not to open that door, and you opened it anyway. And I am trying to find a word that is big enough for what I am right now, and I don't think it exists." Hiro reached for the notepad. He wrote for a moment. He turned it around. It said, "How did you find out?" Kenji told him. "All of it. Taka, the break room, the 2 co-workers at the door, the 45 seconds of every single wall he had built around this decision, simply disintegrating in a place as ordinary as an office break room on a Wednesday." He told it plainly, without softening it or trying to use it as a platform for his own guilt, Because making Hiro manage his feelings was not something he was willing to do anymore. He just told the truth. And Hiro listened with those calm, measuring eyes and wrote one more thing on the notepad when he was done. It said, "I was going to tell you that night. I had a card." And then Hiro reached into the pocket of a jacket hanging on the back of the door. The brown jacket, the one Kenji recognized from 100 ordinary mornings. And he took out a small folded card and held it out. Kenji took it. He opened it. Across the top, 5 small stars were drawn in careful ink, one for each. Inside, in the handwriting that a boy in a library had once called the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, were words that Kenji read, and then had to read again because the first time through his vision did something unhelpful. The card said, "We are going to need a bigger table. 5 reasons. I thought you should know." And below that, smaller. "I love you. I have always loved you. Tell me you want this and I will show you the list I made." Kenji stood in the hallway of the 4th floor of Ren's building, and he did something he had been trying not to do since the break room and was now no longer able to prevent. He pressed the card carefully against his chest, closed his eyes, and his shoulders dropped in the way that a person's shoulders drop when something they have been holding for months finally becomes too heavy to pretend is weightless. He said, "I want this. I want all of it. I want the table and the list and whatever you will give me. And I know I don't deserve any of it. And I am not asking you to pretend I do. I am asking you to let me be here, to let me try, to let me be what I should have been from the beginning." His voice broke completely on the last word, and he let it, because there was nothing left to protect. "Please, Hiro." The hallway was very quiet, and then, from behind Hiro, deeper in the apartment, there was a sound. A soft sound, small and new and utterly unconcerned with everything happening in the doorway. A sound that had never existed in the world before and now did, and the existence of it rearranged the air of the entire hallway into something completely different. And then another, and another. 5 voices, each barely larger than a breath, filling Ren's apartment with the specific world-altering sound of lives that had arrived and were making themselves known. Hiro turned at the sound, and the expression that crossed his face was something Kenji had never seen before. Something so complete and so certain and so full that it made every other expression Hiro had ever worn look like a rough draft. He turned back to Kenji. He looked at him for a long moment, with those warm brown eyes that had always seen him clearly and were seeing him clearly now, seeing all of it. The mistakes and the grief and the genuine, stumbling, insufficient, but real desire to be better. Hiro had always been extraordinary at seeing what was actually there instead of what was convenient. It had always been one of the truest things about him. He stepped back from the door. He held it open. He did not write anything on the notepad. He did not need to. The open door said everything. It said, "This is not forgiveness yet, and it is not the same as before, and there is a very long road ahead of you, and most of it will be uncomfortable, and none of it will be easy, and you have not earned back what you threw away, not even close." It said all of that. And it also said, "But you can come in." Kenji stepped inside. He stepped into the warm, small, thoroughly lived-in space of Ren's apartment, with its mismatched furniture and the notepad on every surface, and the smell of something that had been cooked recently, and the soft, astonishing sound of 5 new lives in the next room. And he understood with his whole body that he was not stepping back into the life he had left. That life was gone. What was here instead was something harder and more complicated, and built entirely by someone else's strength, during the months he had wasted being wrong. He was not returning, when he was arriving, for the first time. As someone who now knew what things cost and had no right to expect anything and was being given, by an act of grace he had absolutely not earned, the opportunity to begin. He would spend the rest of his life trying to deserve that open door. And perhaps, not today, not this month, not without a great deal of time and truth and the slow, unglamorous work of proving himself one ordinary day at a time. Perhaps eventually, he would come close. Hiro moved to the next room. Kenji followed, slowly, the card still pressed carefully in his hand. And when he came through the doorway and saw for the first time the 5 faces that had existed in the world for only a few weeks and already looked, each of them, impossibly and undeniably, and with a resemblance that hit him like a physical thing. Like Hiro, like himself, like the combination of 2 people who had once been very certain they were building a life together. He sat down on the floor of Ren's apartment, and he did not get up for a very long time. He sat there with the card in his hand, and 5 extraordinary reasons surrounding him, and one extraordinary person moving quietly among them with the same steady grace that had always been his most defining feature. And Kenji Mori finally, fully, understood what he had nearly lost. Not almost lost. Not come close to losing. Had lost. Had held in his hands and let fall because someone else told him a story, and he chose the story over the truth that was living right beside him. The truth was still here. It had carried itself forward without him. And if he was very careful, and very honest, and very patient, all the things he had failed to be before, maybe one day it would let him carry it too. But for now, he sat on the floor. And he listened to the sound of 5 small lives that had come into the world in spite of him. And he was grateful, in a way he had never been grateful for anything, that the door had been open. If this story moved you, if Hiro's silence said more than words ever could, if Kenji's fall from grace felt painfully real, if those 5 little lives made your heart do something unexpected, then this story did exactly what it was meant to do. Don't watch this alone. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that the quietest people are often carrying the heaviest things. Drop this in someone's message right now and let them feel it too. And if you want more stories like this, raw, real, dramatic, and deeply human, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because the next story is already coming, and trust me when I say you do not want to miss it. Leave a comment below. Did Kenji deserve that open door? Or should Hiro have kept it closed? Let's talk about it. See you in the next one.